via the virtual universe. This panel, thank you, Paul, for having us, Daniel, for having us, and PepG, and Antonio for all your work. It's very rare where you are on a panel about education savings accounts and you feel like you're the dinosaur in the room, right? And we're the only ones talking about policy, right? In some ways, this is the only panel that sort of is really focusing on the idea of policy related to versus implementations or cool kid ideas. Our goal today is discuss the history and growth of ESAs and where they fit in the overall movement for greater educational freedom. Just to make sure we're clear on definitions for people who might be online or for people who are not sure, education savings accounts or scholarship accounts or empowerment scholarship accounts, however you name them, allow parents to receive a deposit of public funds into a government authorized account with restricted but multiple uses for educating their children. These funds, which families can generally access via an online platform like Students First provides and others, can cover tutoring, private school tuition and fees, online learning programs, curriculum, community college costs, higher education expenses, and other approved customized learning services and materials. Some ESA programs, but not all, even allow students to use their funds to pay for a combination of public school courses and private services. You know, 10 years ago in 2011, there was no such thing as an education savings account. Today, there are now 8 programs in over 20 in operation, and over 20 states actually introduced them this last year. So it is the policy of the day. There are currently about 31,000 students using ESAs. That'll jump significantly in the next few years, and over 4 million families are eligible to use ESAs. For historical perspective, in early 2011, right after what was then known as the year of school choice. So for those of you who don't remember, in 2011, many states passed a broad number of school voucher programs and tax credit scholarship programs, Indiana being the largest of those. And it was called the year of school choice. EdChoice and worked with Goldwater to provide a small grant to create a paper written by Dan Litz of the Goldwater Institute. That paper and the small new program that were created a result were the first iteration of an idea called education savings accounts. The next iteration of that idea, frankly, in terms of a paper, came in October 2012 when Dr. Ladner published The Way of the Future Education Savings Accounts for Every Child. Now, prior to this, it's important that school choice movement was just about schools, not learning opportunities, right? So think about it. You could access schools by doing it or paying for it yourself, i.e. homeschooling or private schools. You could access it by getting into a lottery. Thank God we have a charter or a magnet school. We can get into a lottery and maybe a unified enrollment system will help us out. Or you could get a voucher or a tax credit to go to a private school. That was it was all about schools. But it had not actually unleashed a really massive marketplace of options and learning opportunities. And so the kind of which we discussed yesterday. ESAs actually offer a glimpse into that future, and our esteemed panel of experts are going to tell us about how they're achieving that in their states and some of the challenges of that. We're joined by Matt Ladner, who is the director of Arizona Center for Student Opportunity at the Arizona Charter School Association. He's also the executive editor of the web blog Reimagined Ed and a senior fellow at EdChoice. Garrett Ballengee, to my left, is the inaugural executive director of the Cardinal Institute for West Virginia Policy, a nonprofit research organization located in West Virginia. And finally, we're going to be joined online, I think, by Cara, Candal, who's the policy director for ExcelInEd, and both a former high school English teacher and research assistant professor at Boston University School of Education. So I want to start with Matt, since Matt was the earliest guy in this program for the idea of ESAs. Matt, talk about the origins of education savings accounts in Arizona and how the idea has grown in that state.
Yeah, it's interesting. There were multiple people that had made ESA-like proposals before we actually did it in Arizona. In 1978, Coons and Sugarman wrote a book called Education by Choice, but for all the world sounds like an ESA system. Dr. Freeman wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal somewhere around 2003 or 4, where he called for something called partial vouchers, right? And I've been told by someone from the Heartland Institute wrote something back in 1990 that sounds like ESAs. We were totally unaware of all these things when it actually happened in Arizona. Arizona is the canary in America's demographic coal mine, right? We are both one of America's 2 premier retirement destinations, and we're a border state, right? So every single day between now and 2030, there's going to be 10,000 people reach the age of 65, right? So the baby boomers are reaching retirement age. And of course, no matter what state you live in, your Hispanic population is also growing, right? So every day between now and 2030, Arizona will become more like itself, and the rest of you will become more like Arizona. So I'm happy to report that we're still chirping in the coal mine. Arizona was in the late 20th century and into this one struggling with enrollment growth. I think that had a great deal to do with our willingness and enthusiasm for school choice. It was well underway. The boulder was rolling downhill by the time I moved there in 2003. People like Jay Heiler here from Great Hearts were the first generation of charter school leaders in the state. Arizona didn't invent charter schools, but we have been the most enthusiastic adopter of them. 22% of our public school students go attend charter schools in Arizona. Our lawmakers embedded scholarship tax credits in 1997. The ESA program came about because we were absolutely determined as a school choice coalition that we were going to give school choice options to children with disabilities. And we had passed a voucher program. It was signed into law by our Democratic governor, Janet Napolitano. And then it was struck down by a Blaine Amendment challenge, right? So these Blaine Amendments, I don't know how familiar you guys are with them, but they were basically put in place by sort of nativists and even the Ku Klux Klan back during a dark period of our history. The Arizona Supreme Court struck down our voucher program for children with disabilities. And Dan Lives, as Robert said, had written a paper for the Goldwater Institute, which had proposed an ESA program. And Dan deserves a lot of credit. He doesn't get nearly the recognition he deserves. Because Dan not only wrote that paper, he was constantly in everyone's ear about like, okay, we need to do this ESA thing, right? My small contribution to this, which is not much because in my view, ESAs were inevitable. They were going to happen sooner or later. My contribution to this was to simply recognize that, wait a minute, the court ruling that struck down school vouchers has left a path open for something like an ESA. And that is, in fact, the case today. In Arizona, school vouchers are still unconstitutional. ESAs have survived court challenge and are constitutional. And along the way, we kind of figured out that, well, you know what, this is actually a superior model of choice to a school voucher, precisely because it enables, first of all, the sort of unbundling, right? The use of multiple vendors rather than simply one school. This actually kind of fits into a very rich academic literature about enrichment spending, right? Upper income Americans have been spending more and more money. Yes, they buy their way into the best public schools, but they also use tutors and Kumon and Mathnasium and summer camps and club sports and all these sort of things. That sort of spending has been increasing among upper income Americans for decades, and it got up to $9,000 per child amongst like the upper decile, per child per year. Okay. So yeah, you're going to get your spot in the good school, but you're also not going to totally rely on it. You're going to do all these other things. Okay. There is enrichment spending amongst lower income people as well, but not nearly as much. And the trend is flat. Okay. So I think the implications of that literature are actually quite profound, because it basically tells us that if you look at American scores compared to international scores, for instance, Dr. Peterson has done this for Education Next, our upper end tends to do okay, right? We do pretty good. Our whether you look at this by race and ethnicity or income or whatever, right? And it's really on the lower end of the scale where we're really falling apart. But I would assert that it's the case that we can't even know to what extent is it that our higher end scores, could we attribute them actually to the school system, right? Given that there's all this enrichment spending going on. So the idea behind ESAs is that we should create the opportunities to sort of customize, to use multiple vendors to everyone. This is an opportunity that everyone should have, not just those who can afford it using their own money. And in the process, we hope that we've created a model of school choice that actually creates powerful incentives for people to be careful with the spending and to consider opportunity costs, right? This should not just be, is this worth doing? It should be, is this the best possible use of my funds, right? Because I have other uses of funds. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm pleased with the growth of the movement around the country from Arizona's first small program, and we'll see where it goes from here.
So Arizona started this small program for special needs families. It was a very big success. If you look, at least if you talk to the families who experienced it and still experience it. But it was still a limited program, right, for a small sector of the society and the public. Along comes West Virginia and says, hey, I wonder if we can blow this out of the water and do something different. Maybe we could do something that every child can get access to this. So Garrett, you were working with that from the very beginning, 5-6 years ago. And so how did we get to this idea that ESA shouldn't just be for certain segments, it should be for everyone? And what was the process in West Virginia?
Well, thank you for that, Robert. First of all, thank you everyone for having me here. It's a little bit surreal to be speaking at this panel, kind of remembering what it was like back in 2015, whenever our little Cardinal Institute was just getting started. And I'm a native West Virginian, born and raised, and I've spent my entire life there with the exception of a few short years in DC. When I returned back to the state, begin looking around, you say, well, what are the problems here? I'll tell you what, first, let me do a little audience engagement. Whenever I say West Virginia, feel free to throw out what first comes to mind. And you won't insult me.
Roads.
John Denver, Major Harris. Wow.
Yeah.
I already liked you, but now I really like you. Anything else? You won't insult me. Yes. Yes. Greenbrier. Okay, well, you guys are a little bit of a harder crowd. I was hoping lack of opportunity. What was it? Yeah, yes. Joe Manchin's original name was Joe Mancini. Lack of opportunity. The highest overdose death rate in the country. The highest percentage of people on disability. A smaller population now than what it had in 1950. And so you begin evaluating that state and you think, what is fundamentally wrong here? And to us, it was quite obvious. It was a lack of education and education opportunity. And so we set out looking for ideas that we thought would be uniquely helpful for the population of West Virginia. We were at a conference not too dissimilar from this one. And I was listening to Jonathan Butcher, whom I'm sure many of you know, and he was talking about ESAs. And I thought, this is it. This is it for our state. So I talked to Jonathan. I said, would you mind writing a paper for our little Cardinal Institute detailing how ESAs could work in a state like West Virginia? And as you guys, if you know Jonathan, absolutely, let me know what you need. Not even going to charge you anything to do it. So we took that paper in 2016, the very first. I have to admit too, I met Robert at that same conference, I believe. Robert, in typical fashion, put his arm around me. Let's go to dinner. So I'm like, great, dinner on EdChoice. I'm sure it'll be steak and we'll have a good time and whatnot. No, I don't know if you remember how much of this you remember, Robert, but for 2 hours, Robert grilled me on what we were going to do to get ESAs done in West Virginia. Sitting at his right, I was 27, sitting at Robert's right hand, and this wonderful man asking me how we're going to get this done. I had no idea. So we got the paper written. We went across the state, debates, op-eds, radio interviews. Anyone that would have us, we started talking about what education choice meant for West Virginia. And for context, up until 2019, West Virginia had no school choice at all. Had no charter schools, certainly no private school choice programs. So we were not only explaining ESAs, we were also explaining school choice. First ESA bill gets enrolled in 2017 by Senator Patricia Rucker, whom I'm sure many of you guys also know, our wonderful legislative champion on this. Doesn't really go anywhere, makes it out of the committee, I believe. 2018, another ESA bill gets enrolled. Then what happens? The Red for Ed movement starts in West Virginia. 2 weeks, the teachers unions walk out of all 55 districts in West Virginia, and all children in West Virginia, unless you had the ability to go to a private school, were without an education for 2 weeks. 2019, another ESA bill gets enrolled in addition to charter schools and things like that. Another teacher strike, Red for Ed, this time explicitly against the concept of school choice. The first walkout was ostensibly about pay and benefits and things like that. This one was all about keeping choice out of the hands of families. So 2020 hits. We all know what happens. Our coalition makes a decision. Well, you know what? We're not really gonna, let's let this breathe a little bit. Begin gearing up for 2021. HB 2013, the Hope Scholarship Bill. I may get a tattoo of that at some point, we'll see, though I remain uninked right now. Was the most expansive ESA bill in the country's history. 93% of kids are eligible for the Hope Scholarship. It passed the House March 4th, 2021. It passed the Senate March 17th, 2021, and it was signed by Governor Justice March 27th, 2021. And so what happened since then? Hope. Families who have never had the ability to actually make a choice about their child's future have been given hope. 93% of the families in West Virginia are eligible. There are no income limits. There are no geographic restrictions. If you want the Hope Scholarship, you can get the Hope Scholarship. And so we have seen new schools started. We get calls almost every day from families and parents. How do I access this money? What does this mean for my child's education? We have seen a population that is used to having things done to them, able to finally actively engage in creating their own future. I think that's fundamentally what the Hope Scholarship is about. It's fundamentally what ESAs are about, and we've seen it on the ground in West Virginia. So our organization has started helping families, as Jamie Buckland's organization has as well. We have started reaching out to many private schools across the country to get them to relocate or expand to West Virginia. We've contacted 1,000 providers across the country. And if you would like to come to West Virginia, please let me know. I'll give you a marketing pitch. We'd love to have you. And right now, there is a little bit of a dark cloud, I must admit. It's under litigation. It is scheduled, the Hope Scholarship is scheduled to go before our Supreme Court, October 4th. Or arguments begin at 11:30, if I'm not mistaken, so tune in. If you would like to write an op-ed on how it would be a travesty if this isn't passed, then you will certainly get my endorsement. So that's where we are. In terms of numbers, almost 3,500 kids were already approved for the Hope Scholarship by the time the lawsuit was filed. We were expecting it would be about 4,000 by the time the program was actually up and running. And for context, again, they have never had school choice before, and we had 4,000 families saying, yes, I want to craft my own child's future. And so with that, I'll turn it back to you, Robert.
So, well, that dinner, by the way, led to lots of support from EdChoice for Cardinal for the last 7 years, because you guys have been amazing.
I would have been happy with just another steak.
But for also context sake, just to add to that, 4,000 families in West Virginia is, I think, roughly 7%.
Yeah.
7% of the total population. Florida's school choice program, Cara, correct me if I'm wrong, is still only at 4% of the population, eligible population. So I can't wait to hear about it. It is now with the new ESA, which is what we're going to talk about. But most of the school choice programs in their first year do not come anywhere near that kind of eligible usage or potential eligible usage. So with that, then we go to Florida. Cara at ExcelInEd is with us. Cara from ExcelInEd. She's going to tell us about the Florida experience. And Florida, for context, had already the nation's largest private school choice program. It had a scholarship tax credit program. It was serving over 100,000 families. And then it says, hey, we need to try this and go to this ESA route. So Cara, if you could give us why Florida did that and what the Florida experience is.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be with you all today, but I'm guessing you're glad I'm not given my diagnosis. Yeah, I mean, the Florida story is an interesting one, Robert. As you point out, it's by enrollment had the largest number of school choice programs. And whereas West Virginia's model is sort of a blow it up model, let's give as many kids eligibility as we can. The Florida story is really one of sort of strategically tinkering over time, right? So the tax credit scholarship program, which you mentioned, Robert, which was enrolling well over 100,000 kids before it recently transitioned, and I'll talk about that in a moment, is something that grew over time with a very concerted effort, and I think and very important to point out, with sort of continuity of leadership, especially at first under Governor Jeb Bush, who is the founder of our organization, continuity of leadership, and then in subsequent leaders who championed school choice, championed access specifically to the tax credit scholarship. Some of you will remember the 2016 election in Florida, and where some pundits would say that Andrew Gillum lost the election because he was threatening to take away choice from so many families. So that's kind of the story of Florida. Now the ESA, and why an ESA? So Florida, following in Arizona's footsteps, established the Gardner ESA program. Can't remember what year exactly, in 2014. And by 2017, that was already the largest ESA program in the country by enrollment, and it had quite a wait list. There had been talk for many years about transitioning the children in the tax credit scholarship program to a full voucher post lots of litigation earlier in the at the turn of the century when the program was first established. And the Gardner program, which was already highly successful for students with unique abilities, this is for students with very specific disabilities, was folded into what is now called the Family Empowerment Scholarship. So what we did was transition all of the children over time that were on the tuition tax credit scholarship into what is a voucher, and then a subset of that voucher, which is the Family Empowerment Scholarship for students with unique abilities, is the former Gardner ESA. So why ESA, I think, is the question you asked me, Robert. And I think that the answer has already been covered pretty well here. Specifically for students with disabilities and the Gardner Scholarship, we found that interestingly enough, many people perceive, and I don't even think it's a matter of perception, homeschool coalitions are often very skeptical, for example, of ESAs, right? Because they represent a government program, something that a lot of homeschoolers are saying, wait, I actually homeschool to not have that in my life. But for example, the Gardner ESA, we have data that say like up to 33% of kids using Gardner were actually homeschool students. And so the flexibilities that ESA allowed were really important, especially for students who, with certain disabilities, who weren't getting necessarily what they needed from the public system. I think it's really important to note, and I'm going to be so eager to see how this goes in West Virginia, that we've also seen in Florida over time, providers within ESA programs really rise up to serve the needs of students with unique abilities and others. So now that we have the Family Empowerment Scholarship for students with unique abilities, that program itself, that ESA program, enrolled 20,000 students just last year alone. And then the Family Empowerment Scholarship itself, the other part of which is about 75,000 students, that's the former tax credit program, will, we hope, in the coming years, transition to a full ESA. And I think, the answer to why did the state decide to go that way is because it's the clear option that families want and that families need. For many students, private school tuition, being able to pay private school tuition, whether it's through a tax credit or through an ESA, is really important. But to the point that Dr. Ladner made earlier, it's not the game changer that it is. We all know that upper middle class families are not only able to move to a district that they want or pay private school tuition, but they're also doing all of these supplementals. I'll just add one thing, Robert, which I think is really important to note, and that is that in transitioning the Gardner ESA into the Family Empowerment Scholarship, which is formula funded, and in transitioning the tax credit scholarship into the formula funding, which means that state money is paying for it now. It's essentially a voucher. It's really very important. Florida was able to raise a lot of money for tax credit scholarship students over time. I mean, really step up for students under John Kirtley just has done amazing stuff, but it's a vulnerable source of funding. And Gardner was previously funded by appropriation. It's a vulnerable source of funding. So the strategic moves that the state has made over time, I think, not only provide a safety net for kids, but are going to allow us to transition more and more of the population over time to ESA until, of course, the goal is, just like Garrett, to get to universal.
And Arizona obviously did get to universal this year. And we'll see how that goes based on today's results of the signatures being delivered. It's going to potentially go to ballot. First question I'd like to ask the panel then before we get to the audience question is, in your mind, so ESAs as a policy option, what are the biggest challenges that they've faced? What are the biggest things that have arisen as a result of this new policy idea?
They are administratively complex, to a far greater degree than we appreciated when we passed the first program. We were the first one, so we got to take the bullets and run through the barbed wire for the rest of you. A voucher program is actually very straightforward. It's like you get a coupon and you take the coupon of one type of vendor. That's a private school. Boom, very easy. An ESA program is orders of magnitude more complex than that. At first, our Department of Education was trying to administer this program by themselves. It quickly overwhelmed their capacity to deal with the number of purchases going on. Subsequent to that, other states have, we were a late adopter in bringing in outside firms and outside expertise to help administer the program, and it's gotten a lot better over time. Subsequent states have decided not to administer their programs through the departments of education, which are more or less like, receptacles for federal funds and federal compliance offices. And this is not really the thing they do. So we saw some states do treasurer's offices. We've seen the state of Florida was the first one to basically outsource the administration of the program entirely to a nonprofit, which is step up for students. But I would say that was the biggest lesson, was that this is complicated, and it's a sort of a work in progress in order to be able to administer the program with fidelity. But we're getting there.
It's a modern program that requires sort of modern technology that I know people like Students First are working on. And as I recall, in the first year of the Arizona program, the program almost shut down because the fax machine didn't have enough paper.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
So, that's the sort of challenges of the administration side. Garrett, how about your side and anyone else about the sort of the issues you're facing in West Virginia?
Yeah, so as Matt was talking, I just kind of wrote down 4 things that immediately came to mind. One is defining success. What success looks like for an ESA program, I think has been relatively difficult for us. I think we have some directional ideas, some directional guidelines, but I think just getting a good idea of what good looks like for an ESA program is somewhat difficult. Overcoming parental skepticism, I think, especially in a place like West Virginia that's not been used to exercising school choice. Parents come at this inherently skeptical. It's almost like a too good to be true sort of mindset. So there requires some education there. Ensuring supply equals demand. Certainly in a place like West Virginia, we don't have a robust supply of private schools and tutoring and therapy services and things like that. So we've tried to make sure that we are marketing the program to people across the country, that we are making sure that schools within West Virginia are aware of the program. Then obviously the flip side of that equation is making sure that parents are aware of these options. Robert, as I've heard you talk about many times, I think the percentage of folks in Indiana that are aware of the voucher program never really gets above 40%, something like this. And so we've set some pretty audacious goals in terms of making sure that every eligible family in West Virginia is aware of the program. And then last, and certainly not least, is just what does the coalition look like? What does an effective coalition to make this work need to look like? You need on-the-ground people, certainly. You need people that have good relationships with the administrative agencies and government officials. You need national partners like EdChoice and others who have expertise in dealing with certain types of issues across the country. And I think you kind of wrap those 4 things up, and those are some of the biggest problems that we've had.
Cara, I know that ExcelInEd has been really leading the way in many ways on sort of the implementation issues surrounding. So why don't you talk about the challenges related to implementation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yes, we run what's called an ESA administrator network. So we work with administrators from every existing ESA program in the country. And, to echo what's already been said, I think it starts at the beginning. Sometimes it's just undesirable features of ESA law that come out in legislative sausage making, such as prior public enrollment requirements that kids have to be in a public school for a certain time, which really hinders parents in their ability to access programs when they need it. I think too, to echo the point about where do you house these programs? We've gone from thinking, okay, just don't put it in a Department of Education to let's put it in all of these other sort of bureaucratic entities. And I don't think we've found a magic bullet. I do agree that looking at success with nonprofit administration, and to my mind, there's two reasons for that. One is because the nonprofit, if they're appointed, can focus on nothing but administering in a sound way the ESA program. That is, they don't have competing interests. And also they usually already have a vested interest in getting the program off the ground. So we see in many cases, very well-intentioned administrators appointed to run these programs that might come into a new job with some experience in education, but have to actually learn what an ESA is. What is this thing that they're administering? So that when you combine it with, you know, what every state that implements an ESA can expect, as West Virginia is going through some status quo opposition. You should probably, you know, just get set up for the lawsuit that, given recent Supreme Court rulings, are going to be harder and harder to hold up in the court of law. But it slows programs. And I think to Garrett's point, when you slow a program down, that's why the opposition is saying, well, let's have a lawsuit, because it stalls the program launch. It deflates the momentum of the movement. Two things that I worry about really specifically with regard to implementation, and one of them I think we're on our way to solving, and that has been originally a lack of competition in the marketplace for what we call digital platforms. So those platforms that allow parents to safely, and in a way that that limits fraud, to safely purchase goods and services that they can with an ESA. And I think that, to be clear, we need to limit fraud, but we also need to center parents in these programs. So providers, the digital platforms that can sort of balance these interests are really important. And I think we're seeing more and more players enter the space to give states options for how they can administer these programs digitally. And to me, that's really, really important. The second thing that I think about quite a bit is, simply put, you know, we've got states that, I'm here in Newton, Massachusetts. I don't think we're getting an ESA anytime soon, as much as I might really love it, right? We've got states that are never going to get into the game. And then we've got states that are like, I want another program. I've got a voucher. I've got a tax credit. I want an ESA. Robert, you know this very well in Indiana. And I think that if we as advocates don't think very intentionally about how we consolidate these programs and make it easier for parents to navigate, then we're just piling on in a way that it's going to be very confusing for parents, especially when, and this happens, different programs are being administered out of different entities. And so I think we need to make really strategic decisions around, should the voucher become an ESA? Do we need 5 programs in a state? Or are we just going to say opportunity looks like multiple diverse options for every kid, and start to advocate for that together?
One question I'd like to ask, and maybe I'm going to ask this the wrong way, and I'm sure my friend Meredith will help me out with this. Sorry to call her out, but so we're at a conference where we're talking about innovative new options, right? So we're talking about these incredible new micro schools and pods and learning opportunities that are very bottom up and not policy driven, right? Don, this is something you're dealing with every day. It's not policy driven, but we're talking about policy. How does sort of ESAs interact with sort of new old kids on the block, as it were, right? So how do they, is it a symbiotic relationship? Is it an oppositional relationship? Should it be? How should it be?
I think it's pretty simple. This is going to happen whether your state passes an ESA or not. The only question is who gets to participate, right? If you have an ESA program, then you're going to make it possible for lower income people to participate in this type of education. It's that simple. When the pod movement started, you'll recall that there was like this fierce pushback, like, oh dear, this is going to like increase in inequities and blah blah blah. And then there was a celebrity DJ named DJ Khaled, I think. Khaled. Yeah, he was on the front page of People magazine talking about how awesome his pod and that he was doing in this guest house in Beverly Hills, and I was like, oh boy, yeah, okay. I mean, the only solution to this is public funding, right? So, you know, micro schools, you know, unbundled education and whatnot, it's actually been proceeding for decades in a way that we didn't really recognize what it was. It was called sending your kid to mathnasium, right? That's going to continue to happen regardless. If you want to step in and actually give people control of their public funding, then there will be broader access in a more equitable democratic way. And if you don't, there won't be. I mean, that's what it amounts to.
Okay.
So I'm very much a proponent of just let 1,000 flowers bloom. And I think ESAs are waking people up in a way that perhaps we've never seen before, just in terms of entrepreneurship and people thinking, well, my goodness, I don't just have to send my kid to a traditional public school. So I think ESAs, even if not directly kind of fertilizing that soil, it's certainly opening up that conversation in places that have never had it before. And so I think it's a very symbiotic relationship.
Cara?
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with anything that's been said. I think that, you know, we are going to see, in part as a result of the pandemic, more and more reforms that will interact really well with ESAs. And we're already seeing, for example, miniature versions of ESAs in microgrants that are happening across states where kids don't have to leave the public school. We're seeing, for example, in New Hampshire, kids can take an ESA and public schools can be a provider. So I see a great symbiosis between these and other reforms. And I think it's just about where you are and if you have a taste. And it's sort of like once parents have a taste of this, even if it's a supplemental microgrant, I think you cannot take it away like this sort of done. Give me my $5,000 and let me direct funds for what I know is best for my kid.
Let's start taking questions. Dr. Peterson, you have a question?
So this is a fascinating, I need.
Right here?
Here we go. So, great discussion and a topic dear to my heart. It's this last point is the one that's intriguing to me because the micro school, hyper school, the things we talked about yesterday have an integrity that they are bottom up and nobody's making money on the deal. They're sacrificing, maybe they're going to make money if they really do a terrific job and go to scale in some way. But now as soon as you have the government saying, here's some free money, then you've got the opportunity for people to sort of, I call it the topless bar problem. You know, this is the problem that came up in Arizona when the vouchers were first put out there, or no, the charter schools were first put out there, and one appeared on the top of a topless bar, and that, you know, that set us back for a while. So how do we make sure that if we come in with ESAs that we don't sort of undermine the credibility and integrity of the bottom-up movement that we've been talking about?
Lisa Graham Keegan was superintendent of public instruction when someone tried to open a charter school and a gentleman's club, and yeah, she shut that down. For the record, it didn't actually happen, but
Wow.
yeah,
Things
It's
I
a
didn't
good
expect I'd be
phrase. You have
talking
to
about this
admit.
morning.
yeah. I mean, you know, look, it's funny, and of course, we do get a lot of this. You know, we those of us who live in Arizona, we hear all the murmuring about, oh, you guys are the Wild West and blah blah blah, and it's true, and we're proud of it, right? I should mention that when Stanford's Educational Opportunity Project, you know, they linked testing data from across the country. And a few years ago, from 2008 to 2018 in K-8, Arizona students are leading the nation in academic gains. That doesn't mean we have the highest test scores. It means our kids learn more per year of schooling than any other state, okay? And that, I've been in front of entire Arizona audiences, and I'm like, there's only two unique things about our K-12 system. Number one, we're constrained on funding because we have lots of old people and lots of kids. Number two, we have a lot of school choice. More than half of the kids in the Phoenix metro area do not attend their zone district school. And I've challenged people to tell me one other thing that is unique about K-12 education in Arizona. No one's ever been able to do it. So these things will happen. Freedom is messy, but the juice is totally worth the squeeze, in my view.
So let me just add to that moderator privilege before you. So I think one of the challenges is to ensure the integrity of the bottom up is to not overly define it or overly regulate it as we start allowing families to have the freedom to move. West Virginia, for example, through the great intentions of some of our partners said, hey, let's create a micro school bill that defines it. Well, in the definition, it defined them right out of taking the ESA. Right? And so there's a conversation about should the regulation be a negative, sort of like defending the rights to try these things, or a positive, let's define them. And I think one of the ways that we keep the integrity of the bottom up is to not sort of force definitions and to fight regulation, would be one way I'd say that. I don't know what you were gonna say.
Very briefly, sort of a cousin to Matt's answer on that, but I think the next 5 to 10 years are key for that in regards to research. Studying how these programs are helping kids, studying how the distributed nature of these programs are helping kids and families, and putting good, hard, solid data behind that, and making a compelling case that freedom is the reason why these are successful. And we need more research on that.
There's a couple questions. Are there any questions here? I'm gonna yes, Michael, and then I'll take some online questions.
Agree with Paul, super compelling conversation. I'm curious just to get a little bit more granularity on what you're learning about those who are exercising the ESA. How many programs are they availing themselves of? Are you starting to see some regulatory pushback of saying we want to constrain those options? Like what does that look like with a little bit more detail?
We do have people studying the uses, like how people use the accounts around the country. And usually these things start off with, I want to say 70–80% of the funding going to private schools.
90%.
Right. But then it sort of blossoms out over time to a wider universe of providers. So is there attempts to regulate the programs every single day and twice on Sunday? Sure. It never stops. Right. I mean, it's not the case that the things that people, education wonks and whatnot tend to get most excited about is the multi-vendor freewheeling, like I'm going to hire my own tutor and do all that sort of thing. And there are plenty of people doing that, but it actually starts out as a minority of users and grows over time.
We've actually in Arizona, EdChoice has been the leader in sort of looking at sort of how parents are using data, both in Florida and Arizona, and we'll continue to do that. In Arizona, our first study of families who were using it I think it was about 90% of the families were using them for private school tuition. The second time we did it was down to 78. And so there's a significant growth in the number of customization, and we'll see that, I believe, over time. And I think the same thing is happening in Florida based on what Dr. Luca just put out. In our Annenberg school. So I think there's really interesting things going on as families getting more and more used to customizing, more and more able to understand what these programs are. Yes, and then we'll take one online. Yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to understand motivation for people who are aware of ESAs, for parents who are aware of ESAs and choose not to partake, choose not to use them. Do you have a sense as to why not?
Yeah, I mean, like there's always this apocalypse story, right? Oh my gosh, if you pass universal ESAs, the sky's going to rain frogs and everyone's going to leave the public schools, blah, blah, blah. And it's been false. 7% is probably the record, okay? But usually these programs start off very small and grow incrementally over time. There are a lot of people that still want the bundle, and the bundle is still available to them, right? I mean, in Arizona, we have charter schools and tax credits and all the rest of this stuff. And a majority of students still go to our district schools, right? Now, the district schools perform much better now than they used to before choice, right? Yep. But they're still there. They always will be there. Their funding is guaranteed in the Arizona Constitution, and no one is making any move whatsoever to ever get rid of that. So there will be a lot of people that don't do it. But the thing is the kids back in the district school system are better off because they have effectively chosen the school they're going to, right? Like every school eventually becomes a school of choice. It's open enrollment is actually the biggest form of school choice in Arizona, and it's twice as big as the charter school sector, right? So it's not the death knell of public education, right? It's actually something that's very productive. Every kid has their own solution they need to find. For some kids, it's going to be ESAs. So a lot of kids, it's charter schools, and a lot of kids, it's districts. It all works out.
I don't know if we know the answer of why specifically they're not choosing. We're actually going to do some research on that. So we need to understand why parents, I know Jamie probably has some points on this, but so I think we need to delve into that more. I will say, as I've been reading Todd Rose's book, Collective Illusions, and this idea of conformity bias, there is a sense where people want to conform to a bundle, right? And over time, as that unbundles itself, I think you'll see more people choosing.
Robert, can I
At
just
least in
offer?
West Virginia.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Cara.
I just wanted to say really quickly too, I think just to not overlook a pretty simple explanation. I think what is it, 10, 11 ESA programs in 10 states across the country. And many of them aren't having uptake because parents simply don't know. We're not doing a good job of getting the word out. And Garrett made this point earlier. I mean, I think to my mind, that's one of the simplest explanations. And then the other part of that is, even if parents do know, like in Florida now, some of these programs have been around so long that district schools are saying, your kid should probably consider, you might really want to consider an ESA for your family. That's not happening most places, right? That's a long-term thing. But we also need to think about, and some states are doing a better job of this than others, once parents know that hurdle they have to clear to applications and qualification documentation and uploading all the things, for some of the parents that qualify for these programs, those are huge hurdles to face. They might not even have the technology to do that at home. They need parent navigators. They need help once they're aware, because it's for too many of these programs, it's no small feat to prove that you're in fact eligible. And you have to do that annually, by the way. So we need better legislation to relieve this burden on parents to make it easier.
And I'll call it the Tesla problem. A lot of people sort of look at it, they think it's exciting, it's interesting, but they're still a little bit nervous to be an early adopter of it until a lot of the bugs are worked out, until there's an infrastructure behind it. And so similar to people looking at Tesla, well, that looks like a nice, fun car, but I'm gonna wait a few years before I indulge. And I think there's something similar going on too with school choice, with ESAs.
So one of the questions that came from online is, what efforts have Arizona made to empower and inform families of color regarding the ESA?
Yeah, we have like 3 different nonprofit projects that are doing kind of Cara used the term navigation. This is a very important development. These programs are complex. People have a lot of options. The options are complicated. So we have, for instance, a project called Love Your School that basically navigates and helps people find schools. Families Empowered is opening up in Tucson. And yeah, there's other efforts. So, like it is a project that, like people don't understand this. This tends to evolve organically, right? People usually make their school decisions based on their own social networks, right? And so the growth will happen over time. If you did more navigation, it would certainly make a difference. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
And well, look, there's also efforts with the Black Mothers Forum in Arizona that are working on it. We've been hiring Kayla to do her work. Empowered Arizona Families, or Empowered AF. I love that name. I just kept saying it right. I know it's a terrible name, but it's interesting. So there's lots of effort.
There's lots of efforts, yeah.
So any other questions in the audience? I'll take another one here online then. What is the best way you have found to communicate with parents about the ESA opportunities?
You have to think about scalability, but for us, it's good old-fashioned face-to-face communication. Go take a leveraged mother in a community, take her out to coffee, take her out to lunch, explain the program, and then similar to what Jamie is doing, what we're trying to do, which is build ambassadors for it. Build ambassadors that are respected and well-known in the community, empower them with knowledge and materials and support, and have them be your best advocate. It's not going to be me sitting up here in a suit and tie. It's going to be folks like Jamie. It's going to be people that are already well embedded in a community and are already able to sort of implement kind of network effects within their communities.
Anyone else? I want to get us back on time. Do we have another question? Sorry, yes, please. Yes, sir.
Some homeschooling parents are worried about strings attached to some of this money, and you also mentioned that sometimes laws are passed that specifically define micro schools and other pods out of it. So I'm just curious, are the homeschooling parents ever right about those strings attached? And how do you do a better job of dealing with legislators and working with homeschooling parents in order to get over that?
So the first ESA program, the Arizona Homeschool Association had very deep concerns and could have easily squashed in the Arizona legislature. They chosen to do so. We had extensive conversations. The bill was actually structured such that we have a legal definition for what homeschooling is in Arizona. And in our original statute and to this day, it makes it very clear that legally you can never be a homeschool student and the ESA student at the same time, right? Now you can go to an ESA family and see them doing stuff that looks a lot like homeschooling, right? But legally they are not homeschool students. So, and since that time, the Homeschool Association has been a member of the School Choice Coalition in the state. They get to hear everything we're talking about and whatnot. So these issues are important, but they can be navigated.
They are important. And they're, so anyone, Cara, right? Garrett, do you ever want to add to that?
I would just say that I think the Florida experience is teaching us that over time, homeschool families find that this, the fear of, overregulating their experience or intrusion is probably unwarranted. And that in fact, ESAs can be a great tool for homeschoolers. So I'm hoping that we can see that in other places. I mean, not every law is the same. And so it really depends on how an ESA law is structured to convince homeschoolers. Now, Florida, the Homeschool Coalition, works pretty well with those who are advocating for program growth.
Go ahead, Garrett.
I was going to say, and to the extent they do have concerns, I think it's incumbent upon the homeschool community to realize what a powerful force for advocacy they can be within the State House. And so I think sometimes the homeschooling community has chosen to disengage on some level for good reason. But I think as more people are adopting this mindset that I don't just have to send my kid to a traditional school, more and more families are going to be engaged in school choice. And right along with that needs to be an understanding that they are a very powerful force in the State House.
So let me actually answer your question, which you asked, which is, are they right? And I think the answer to that is both maybe yes and no a little bit, in the sense that, look, the biggest threat to any policy, right, and anything, by the way, the state could come along and regulate homeschooling tomorrow. The state could come along and regulate micro schools tomorrow. That's their power. They do that with private schools all the time, right? So if you look at North Dakota private schools, they're basically required to teach the same curriculum as traditional schools, right? So state legislatures can come along and do what they want to do. So when we say, oh, I think a dollar is going to lead to more regulation, well, regulation can come without dollars, right? And it happens all the time. I think there's a question to be say, is there an all or nothing, right? So in the sense of, okay, I love the idea of the sort of bottom-up purity of the sort of concept of homeschooling and sort of parent pay and all that. But I also know the problems we have right now with over-government regulation of our traditional system. I know you know that, right? So somewhere between that and that has to be sort of gray areas of work between. So in Indiana, for example, we know that as we go forward with the scholarship program and an ESA program, some of our private schools may balk at being in this program. And that's okay because they don't want to get in some of the regulations. So they'll take less money in order to achieve the program. So there's this conversation about at what point do you want to join the regulation trail? And at what point do you want to fight for it? Like, so to me, my job is to try and fight for against any regulation that imposes that imposes something that a parent can't choose, right? So it stops a parent from choice. So I think it's a spectrum when you think about it. And does it automatically lead to it? No, depends on your state, depends on how much advocacy you have, depends on how well you work with your homeschooling coalition, your private school coalition. But it can, just like it can in any other industry in education, just like it can with pods, just like it can with tutoring, just like it can with micro schools. And so, look, when legislators start realizing the power of this stuff, they're going to try and come in and regulate it, in my opinion. And so the question will be, how do we solve that? Daniel,
well,
thank you very much.
Thank you. This session has been great. We have about 10 minutes for a break and we'll come back for the next session. Thank you.